is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering chapters 1 through 3 of Fire and Hemlock by Diana Wynne Jones, commissioned by Mordecai72, aka Patricia Bing Grant. So in these 3 chapters, I don't really know what's going on at all, but I'm fine with that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Again, thank you to Patricia for commissioning this. I think she said that it was a birthday present to herself, so happy birthday, Patricia. And I'm really curious how many of you out there have read this book, because Diana Wynne Jones is an author that's more popular than I think I realized. There's a lot of, the one thing that I have learned as I have continued to do Unspoiled podcasts is how many authors I don't know. I'm very ignorant to a lot of types of literature. And then, there's whole genres that I don't get into at all. And this, Diana Wynne Jones, I covered for the book club. It was the first time I had ever read her, and it was Howl's Moving Castle, which was super fun. And I did it as a December episode, which I kind of did on purpose. And it turned out that my instinct was right, because I wanted something sort of comforting and childlike for a December podcast because of Christmas time and that whole feeling. And it was, and yet it was much more adult too than I thought, which I appreciated. Although there are children's books that are childlike, and they still feel like they hold up amazingly. So, but the thing that I was impressed by with her was how well drawn her characters were, how distinct they were, and that is absolutely the case in Fire and Hemlock as well. Polly is the main character, and she's kind of, I really like the fact that Jones goes into talking about the fact that Polly has this best friend that most people, if you're going by the bullshit scale of attractiveness that we use to measure most people would say that Polly was the prettier and more attractive of the two of them. But Polly was jealous of her friend Nina because she was plump, because she had dark hair, because of all of the things that we would often cite as being a negative. That's what Polly liked about her. And I really distinctly remember when I started to get older and would realize that I had been jealous of girls' appearances in ways that didn't suit how, I guess, just popular opinion. And there were several friends of mine that I just wanted to look like. And it, growing up, I was like, wow, I really just had a different understanding. But kids are not fucked up with the societal expectations of things. And so it's just a whole different perspective that I wish I could get back, to be honest. Oh, here's Patricia. Hi, Patricia. Happy birthday. So we start off with Polly, and we find out what Fire and Hemlock is way sooner than I expected, to be honest. Because I thought that was going to be, something that we eased into or that came up later in the story that there's a spell that I have to do that has this. But it turns out that it's the name of a painting that she has hanging on her wall in her bedroom at her grandmother's house. And that when she was young, she had always thought that there were people in the fire. And now that she's gotten older, she can tell that it's really just hay bales, and that there was enough smoke in the air in the photo that she doesn't, she realizes that she had created people where there weren't any with her imagination, which I suspect isn't entirely what happened. And forgive me, earlier I called it a painting. It's a photograph. So yeah, there's something about this photo that is magical. Like, it has to be, right? There's something going on with it. And she used to distinctly see something different when she was a kid, which she puts down to having an overactive childish imagination, and I don't think that's all it is. And there's a line, I don't know if you guys know this, but in Kindle books, they will have little moments that are like underlined in really faint, and you can maybe see it I'm holding it up to the camera, and it'll say like so many number and then highlighters, which means a lot of readers highlight this one particular section. This one is 37, but I've seen it as much as like 7,000 if it's a really popular book. The penalty of being grown up was that you saw things like this photograph as they really were. Amen, sister. You know, I often use as an example my own, like when I was a kid and I was coloring in a drawing of a butterfly in a coloring book, and I colored its wings 2 different patterns and colors. And my uncle was like, why didn't you make them match? And I gave him this look of total disgust and was like, 'cause that would be boring. And, you know, me today, it wouldn't even occur to me to not make them match. And isn't that a bummer that we're so limited as adults? Like, we just reach this point where it's not even that we don't think that's a good idea. It's that it doesn't even enter our heads because that's how closed off we've become. Bummer. So Polly's having this interesting thing that really reminds me of, and I won't get into spoilers, but there's a character in The Dark Tower who is in 2 different timelines, and in one of those timelines, they've died. And in the timeline in which they have not died, they start to go a little crazy because they swear that they're dead, and they can feel like in their gut that they shouldn't be here, but they are. And so there's this thing that's really weird, where she's having like memories that this book was different than it is. I'm just going to read this because it's hard to like put into words. Her hand knocked the book. Polly did not get up after all. And books put down on their faces spoiling them, Granny would say. It's only a paperback, Granny. It was called Times Out of Mind, editor L. Perry, and it was a collection of supernatural stories. Polly had been attracted to it a couple of years back, largely because the picture on the cover was not unlike the Fire and Hemlock photograph. Dusty smoke with a dark blue umbrella-like plant against the smoke. And now Polly remembered she had read the stories through then, and none of them were much good. Yet here was an odd thing. She could have sworn the book had been called something different when she first bought it. And surely, hadn't one of the stories actually been called Fire and Hemlock too? Polly picked up the book with her finger in it to keep the place of the story she was reading. She remembered the ending now. The man finished by having 2 sets of memories, and the story wasn't worked out all that well. Polly didn't worry when she lost her place in it as she leafed through looking for the one she thought had been called Fire and Hemlock. Odd, it wasn't there. Had she dreamed it then? She did often dream the most likely seeming things. Odder still, half the stories she thought she remembered reading in this book were not there. And yet she did very clearly remember reading all the stories which seemed to be in the book now. For a moment, she almost felt like the man in Two-Timer with his double set of memories. What a madly detailed dream she must have had. Polly found her place in the story again, largely because the pages were spread apart there, and stopped in the act of putting the book face down on her rumpled bedspread. So, this is just such a weird thing that I really like that we're starting the book with, because I feel like it's a tendency to let us get to know a character before we have them kind of dealing with something that's weirdly complex and esoteric, like having a double set of memories. But I like that this is just getting into the weirdness, like, right away. And sorry, there's some commentary I want to address. Growing up is such a letdown. Amen, Abby. This makes me think of Circle of Magic books by Tamora Pierce, where Nico doesn't want to tell the kids what powers they have because it would limit them. That's a good... I don't know that book, but that feels really smart, to be honest. Diane Duane has a similar idea in her Young Wizards books too. Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. For the next commission, like an hour after this one, actually, I'm doing the next section in So You Want to Be a Wizard. So yeah. Oh, and Melanie's here. Hi, Melanie. So anyway, sorry guys. Getting back to this. So I just really, I again, like this, and it got me really interested, like, okay, something had to have happened, right? She used to see something in the photo, she doesn't anymore. And she has this weird memory, double memory of other things being really different. And she's trying to, like, kind of leaf through the memories that she's got of this last year. And finally, she says, the funeral. And we kind of go back in time a little bit. In those days, people who did not know Polly might have thought she chose Nina as a friend to set herself off by comparison. Nina was a big fat girl with short frizzy hair, glasses, and a loud giggle. Polly, on the other hand, was an extremely pretty little girl, and probably the prettiest thing about her was her mass of long, fine, fair hair. In fact, Polly admired and envied Nina desperately, both Nina's looks and her bold, madcap disposition. Polly, at that time, was trying to eat a packet of biscuits every day in order to get fat like Nina, and she spent diligent hours squashing and pressing at her eyes in hopes of either making herself need glasses too, or at least of giving her eyes the fat, pink, startled look that Nina's had when Nina took off her glasses. She cried when Mum refused to cut her hair short like Nina's. She hated her hair. This is like, just, yeah... as little kids, we just get weirdly obsessive about certain aspects of appearance and stuff that we decide for whatever reason is what we want. And it's just, you know, really arbitrary. And then we grow up and get screwed up and all kind of want similar things. And Nina is like she says, madcap is a word. Nina's really fun. She's also a teeny tiny bit of a bully, but not in like a poor-tempered sort of way. It seems like she's fun, but pushy, I guess, is really more of a word than bully. She's really pushy. So anytime that she suggests doing something that Polly doesn't seem like she really wants to do, Nina's response is, well, you better do it or I'm not going to be friends with you anymore, which inevitably gets Polly to do it because she really does kind of low-key wonder if Nina would stop being friends with her. Like, she doesn't really believe it, but maybe. And they are kind of joined at the hip. They do everything together all the time because they live nearby each other. And they're hanging out at her grandmother's house, and they realize that it's Halloween. And so they decide they're going to dress up as high priestesses. And Granny, who is pretty good-natured about this whole thing, finds them like black dresses and these like robes, these curtains to like wrap around them to make them look like robes. And they decide that they're going to like do a procession up and down the street, except that all the houses are set back from the road and nobody can really see them. So they've been hoping to cause a little bit of a stir by being shocking, but nobody's even there to see them. So finally they are like sitting, they're passing by this one house that has a huge gravel driveway. And when they look down the drive, there is a hearse coming at them, which they flip out and start to run away. And then Nina says the craziest thing I've ever heard, which must be some kind of superstition, but I have never heard it in my life. Nina says, hold your collar till you see a four-legged animal. What? Does anybody in the chat here like know about this? Is that a thing? Like, because that's not one that I'm familiar with at all. And like, you know, I don't expect it to make sense because superstitious things don't make any sense. You know, most of them. What's the one? If you put your purse on the ground, you're going to go broke. If a broom falls down, you're going to have company coming or something like that. There are a bunch of like weird ones. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was like, you know, some sort of established superstition, but I've never heard of it. And I thought I'd heard most of them. So finally we have, Nina who like gives Polly the idea that they are escaping from the police because they have done a human sacrifice since they're priestesses. So they decide to pretend that the police are after them and like run from one backyard to the other, climbing over all the walls in between, which really put me in mind of Shaun of the Dead. And there's an interesting thing where she says the afternoon became more like a dream than ever. And this is where I feel like things must be getting started, going in the weird direction. Some were neat and open. They sprinted through those. Some were overgrown. They were on the edge of giggles the whole time, terrified that someone would catch them, and yet in a dreamlike way, almost sure they were safe. Both of them lost their curtain headdresses in different gardens, but they went on, quite unable to stop or go back, neither of them quite knowing why. Nina invented a reason in about the 10th garden. She said they were coming to a road because she could hear cars, so they went more madly than ever across a row of rotting shed roofs that creaked and splintered under them and jumped down from the wall into what seemed to be a wood. Nina ran toward the open, laughing with relief, and Polly lost her for a few seconds. When Polly came out into the open, it was not a road after all. It was gravel at the side of a house. There was a door open in the house, and through it Polly caught a glimpse of Nina walking up a polished passage, actually inside the house. "The cheek Nina has," she said to herself. For a moment she almost did not dare follow Nina, but the dreamlike feeling was still on her. She thought of the threats Nina would make if she stayed hiding in the wood, and she sprinted on her toes across the space in a scatter of gravel and went into the house too, in a strong smell of polish and scent. Cautiously, she tiptoed up the passage. Here it was completely like a dream. And it turns out, as we find out later, that there's no Nina here, and this is what confuses me in the way that the author completely intended to confuse me. She saw somebody that she later realizes, oh, this is the woman that I saw that I thought was Nina. And she mentions, and I'll get there once I'm going through this, the split in the back of the woman's dress being what makes her think that's who it is, because Nina split the back of her dress getting caught on a thorn or something. And I'm really curious because the woman who she says that about seems to be a very collected, glamorous woman. And how is she wearing a dress with a big split down the back? I wonder if that's, or if maybe that's a fashion, a purposeful split, there's an underskirt or something. But yeah, it feels like something happened when she lost Nina, things shifted and she got put somewhere else for some reason. And she goes in and some guy offers her a glass of orangeade because she's too young to have a cocktail. And she goes in and has this drink in her hand, but never drinks it, which I think is really important. I was the whole time that she was holding it, I was I kind of hope she doesn't drink that because that feels like a bad thing. But she goes in and it turns out to be the reading of a will. And it's super boring. She really doesn't pay very much attention to it because she doesn't know who these people are. Why would she care, And the description of the reading of it and some people getting more and more irritated and resentful and, taking offense over things. I really enjoy that description of it. And then there's, I shan't look on it very kindly if you do, Polly heard the woman say to the man. It was a polite murmur, but it sounded like one of Nina's threats, only a good deal less friendly. So yeah, this is the one. She saw the woman she had mistaken for Nina. It was the split skirt and the black dress, which has caused the mistake. So I think it must be, oh yeah, sorry, Patricia's saying I think it's a purposeful slit. So yeah, I think using the word split skirt makes it sound like it's, an accident. But if it had been described as a slitted skirt, I would see what that meant. But I think it's just the language that she used. And finally, we have Polly sitting here not feeling like she can get up and leave, because she's been accepted into this thing and everybody thinks she's supposed to be there and it would draw so much attention if she just left. But also she's bored as fuck and like an hour goes by almost. And finally this dude sees her and like gestures for her to come with him. And it turns out that he does not want to be there either. Like, he's not somebody who gets along with the rest of this crowd. For some reason, they all seem to dislike him. And we see that much more obviously a little bit later. So finally, the eyes behind the glasses met hers and sort of dragged, and he nodded his head away sideways toward the door. "Come on out of that," said the look. "Please?" it added with a sort of polite questioning stillness. It was a fair cop, Polly nodded too. And that's the first thing that he asks when they go outside is, "Didn't you want your drink?" And that's what kind of like got my attention. I was like, was I right about that being a thing? And they talk about what like if they were going to play pretend, like they get into a childlike, good-natured conversation. And she thinks at first that he knows she's not supposed to be there, but then realizes that he doesn't and kind of lies and finally eventually like confesses, but it's been a little bit by then when she finally blurts out, "Okay, I'm not a relation. I wasn't supposed to be here." And there's this moment that comes up in conversation with Seb later that I did not know what to think of. And he takes her to see these two urns, I guess, is planters that you can turn. And they say here and now on them, but if you stand in a certain way, the lettering only shows up so that it says nowhere. And he has her like turn them. So this feels really significant, but I have absolutely no idea what it means. Like I'm trying to find the spot in the book so that I can read it to exactly how it read you exactly how it's written. So watch. Mr. Lynn's hands moved on the right-hand vase. The vase began to spin slowly, grating a little. 2, 3 heavy turns, and it stopped. Now Polly could see there were letters engraved on the front of the vase. "Here," she read. "Now watch again," said Mr. Lynn. So there weren't letters engraved on it initially until he turned the one, and then the other one turns and it says, "Now. Now here. What does that mean?" And then, "Where?" said the one on the left. "Now," read the right-hand one, upon which Mr. Lynn spun them again. This time, when they stopped, the vases read "No" and "Where." "Oh, I see," said Polly. "Nowhere. That's clever." She moved sideways to look round the curve of the vases and found they still said "Nowhere," though this was because the left-hand vase now seemed to say "Now," and the right one said "Here," from where she had moved to. Both vases really said "Nowhere," but the letters were so arranged on them that you could never see the whole word at once on the same vase. So, yeah, like, I'm dying. I really want to know what this means. "Yes, that's right," Mr. Lynn said. "They both say "Nowhere," really." He spun them again, the slow grinding one and the fast smooth one, and this time they came up with "Here, now." "Heroes see things like that," he said. "It's obviously an enchantment of some kind," Polly agreed, humoring him. "It must be," he said. It sounded as if he was humoring her. Here they both looked round, and Polly was not sure why. The boy who had been at the funeral was standing behind them, still very smooth and neat in spite of the wind. Maybe he had snorted. At any rate, he was looking very scornful. "Oh, hello, Seb," Mr. Lynn said. "You got out at last, then?" "Only because it's over," the boy said contemptuously. And Mr. Lynn, which we find out is his name, he wants to be like a little friendly with this kid, it feels like, but that dude is not having it. Seb just turns and walks away. And this is when he says, "I think we could risk going back in again now. They tell me I'm allowed to choose some of the old lady's pictures. Would you like to help me choose?" And this is when she confesses that she really isn't part of this, but he's like, I'd really like it if you'd come back in with me. And I was like, oh, what is this? This is creepy. But it turns out he's not well liked. So it feels more acceptable once you see, like, he just seems to want some company because for some reason he's getting dirty looks right and left. There's this, okay, I'm going to read this. Some pretended not to notice Polly and Mr. Lynn. Others said, hello, Tom, but they said it in a grudging sort of way and raised their eyebrows at Polly before they turned away. By the time she and Mr. Lynn had edged their way inside to the grand hall again, Polly was sure this had nothing to do with their conversation. The people crowding the hall she could somehow tell were the most important members of the family. Every one of these gave Mr. Lynn a disapproving look if they bothered to notice him at all before turning away. The one person who spoke to Mr. Lynn was a man Polly did not like at all. He turned right around in the middle of talking to someone else in order to stare at Mr. Lynn and Polly. He was a big, portly person with a dark, pouchy piece of skin under each eye. "Slithering off as usual, are you, Tom?" he said jovially. It was not nearly as jolly as it sounded. "No, I'm still here, Morton, as you see," Mr. Lynn said, ducking his head apologetically. "Then stick around," the man said, "or you'll be in real trouble." He laughed to pretend it was a joke. It was a deep, chesty laugh. "Laurel told me to tell you," he said, and went back to talking to the person he had turned away from. So I don't know what this means, but we meet Laurel later, and she seems dangerous. She seems a little bit Mrs. Coultery from the Golden Compass, where she's really pretty and glamorous and charming, but there's like a coldness and ruthlessness under the surface that either she is good at hiding or does not care to hide. And people just accept that about her. I don't know. But yeah, he tells her that's Seb's father, Morton Leroy. He and Laurel are probably going to get married. The pictures are in here. So this is when they start like looking around at different pictures, and there's a swirly modern painting of people playing violins, a big blue-green picture of a fire at dusk where smoke was beginning to wreath around the vast skeleton of a plant like cow parsley in front. And so this is where we have the fire and hemlock picture finally show up. And they finally get interrupted by the woman, Laurel, that she had thought was Nina. And she doesn't seem to want Tom here either, even though she's been looking for him. She asks him, don't you know that I've been looking for you? And when she sees the pictures that they're choosing from the stacks against each wall, she's like, oh, by the way, the ones you can have are the ones over there. The ones against the other wall are too valuable to go out of the family. So what fucking Polly does, because she's shady, is goes and changes around all the pictures so that they're mixed up together. And the ones that she chose for him, it can look like she took from the other pile. But somebody must have just divided them up incorrectly. I don't know what happened. Oh, my goodness. And this is how she winds up, because he's looking at the ones that she chose, and he picks up the photograph, the fire and hemlock one, and tells her to take it, which she has never owned anything like this in her life and is really overwhelmed by the fact that he's giving this away. Meanwhile, Mr. Lynn and Laurel are talking together, and she can hear a little bit through the window. First came Laurel's sweet, light voice saying, "All asking who the child is, Tom." To which Mr. Lynn's voice muttered something about in charge of her, couldn't just leave her. She could tell Laurel did not like this, because she seemed pleased when Mr. Lynn added, "Away shortly, I have a train to catch." One thing was clear. Mr. Lynn was very carefully not telling Laurel who Polly was or how she got there. So this feels more than this person wasn't invited to the funeral. Who are they? What are they doing here? There's more going on here. And that's not unreasonable that there's more going on when it's a child, a minor, who has shown up with no apparent guardian or anything like that. But this feels like even more than that. So she returns to her normal life after this. First, there's like a little bit of a row with Granny when she gets home because she's been gone hours and they had no idea what happened to her. But Mr. Lin convinces her grandma that he's basically harmless, and he goes and gets on his train. He plays the cello for the London Philharmonic. And she goes home to her house with her mom. This was super sad. I don't know how other people felt about this, but I was really surprised at how bleak her life at home is. She leaves, first of all, the photograph on the wall in her bedroom at her grandma's house because she knows, and she feels like her grandmother also knows, that this is not a photo that belongs in the house that she lives in with her mom. Her father is off doing courses, is the way that it's phrased, which I don't know what that means, and I don't feel like Polly does either. Mum was in one of her moods, stony quiet and upright, and the slightest thing would send her off into one of her long grumbles. Polly knew this, although Dad was not there to say warningly, "Quiet, you'll have Ivy and her discontents again." Dad had gone away on a course, Mum said, so Polly shut her mouth and did not raise an outcry at forgetting her picture. This, hurt my heart a little bit. First of all, Dad was away on a course, Mum said. Feels pretty much like Dad ran out and Mum doesn't know what to say, so she's telling her whatever. Secondly, this mom reminded me so much of my mom. It's... God, it's really hard to, get across. If you are a person who is, perceptive, you probably had that from a young age, right? And, you can tell some shit is up. And adults, bafflingly, think that kids are stupider than they are and insult them by saying things aren't happening that are clearly happening, or that they're not mad when they're obviously mad, or that they're not upset when they're obviously upset. My mother had a depressive problem long before she knew she did. But this thing where she's anything could set her off, because her depression would often express itself in anger. And having people over, she didn't like too much noise. It was I'm somebody who likes hosting and I like having people over, and I wanted to do that as a kid, but my mother was always so unfriendly to people that I would bring home that I didn't want to bring them. And one of the few times that I had people over when I was in high school, she flipped out screaming at them because they were being too loud while we were watching a movie, because she was going to bed. And it was 10 o'clock on a Friday. It was not late for high schoolers. And she had told me I could have everyone over, but it became so uncomfortable that they left, and nobody really was going to want to come over again after that. And so the combination here of her having to walk on eggshells and be constantly aware of her mother's emotional state, while also having to kind of sacrifice what makes her happy. Yeah, I feel that hard. And also that her mother is crying right in front of her, and yet being there's nothing wrong. What? I mean, parents, you're not as good at hiding your emotions from your kids as you think. We fucking know when shit's going on. I was always aware of different, shady things that my parents were doing and involved with. Even if I didn't know the details, even if as a child I didn't quite grasp it, you know when some shit is off. You know when there's been a conversation where somebody just said something that made my mom really uncomfortable and she would just tighten up, or really angry and she would shut down. You cry right in front of the kid and you think that they're not going to know? Come the fuck on. So this really hurt to read, of Polly trying to manage things, and the fact that she comes downstairs and realizes that her mom isn't even attempting to pretend that she's going to make dinner. And so she has to be so do you want me to go and get something? And her mom sort of seems to take offense to that and snaps at her a little bit. And Polly realizes that she's going to kind of have to back off and maybe not eat today, which fucked me up. And then finally her mother seems to like realize and be like, oh, okay, you know what? Do you want Chinese or something? I'm trying to find the exact moment because this is a little further on, but I just want to talk about it. Here it is. Mom, shall I go and get fish and chips for supper? Ivy jerked. For God's sake, Polly, don't treat me as if I was ill. Then, as Polly was slithering away, sure that she had pushed Mum from a mood into one of her discontents, she heard Ivy say thoughtfully, Chinese. I fancy Chinese. Or would you rather have Indian, Polly? So, yeah, the money's in my bag. Cross the road carefully. Like, her mom will do the bare minimum, kind of. She'll give her child money for dinner, but she won't go get it for her kid. And I don't want to give the impression that my mother was like neglectful or anything, but there was a real sense of me having to manage stuff much more than most kids did. There was a lot that I was already doing for myself by an age that was not normal. And it's led to, in many cases, me being a complete control freak who does not believe that she can depend on people or count on people. And you can say like it's an independent streak, but that makes it sound more benign than it is. It's I do not trust people is what it comes down to. And that's part of what wound up ending my previous marriage. And that's part of what drew me to Owen, is like, he's one of the few people that says he'll do something and he fucking doesn't. And I don't have to get on his case about it. I don't have to remind him about it because he's an adult and he does shit. And this is just really hard. Like, you know, everything with Ivy, we just see in this third chapter. We haven't even met her, and she's not even mentioned in the first two. So I had assumed that Polly is living with her grandmother because something happened to her parents. And to find out that, like, not only is that not the case, but that maybe she presents it that way mentally because that's what she wishes were true, is a bummer. So anyway, I just wanted to like mention that because when I talk about this writer and how she'll unexpectedly like make something feel much more adult than I think, you know, there's this kind of really childlike adventure thing happening. And then she'll drop something here that's very emotional and real, and how intense that is for children and how much adults underestimate that, you know? So anyway, I'm going to go back to the story now, but I just wanted to kind of deal with her mother. So Polly, like, she's talking to Nina, and there's this weird thing happening where Nina is saying that she's being followed by somebody, two somebodies, actually. And she says that one of them is an older man who's often in a car, and he acts like he's a father, but the boy just stands on the street and stares, which the boy standing on the street and staring is, to me, definitely the creepiest one. But I immediately, when Nina says this, I'm like, oh, I bet they're following Polly. And Nina is just the one who noticed, because Polly is kind of in her own world a little bit more. Like, Nina, I feel like, is, I don't know if savvy is the right word. Maybe she's just nosy, but for whatever reason, she's like got her eye on things more than Polly does. So yeah, they're following Polly, but it's Nina who noticed, and so she assumes it's about her because Nina likes to be the center of attention. I don't know anything about that, Nina. What? So they had been playing at Nina's with all of her awesome toys, and this is the first time that you get a sense of what time this is set in, too, because I kind of had been picturing all of this as being like, I don't know, 50s? Like, there's no real, I guess orangeade isn't a brand, is it? It's just a type of drink. So nothing so far has given an established, like, timeline. But then we have, Nina had cars and action men and guns and Legos and dozens of electronic machines. The batteries were dead, but they were still fun. So this places it much more modern than I had been picturing it, to be honest. And they go home to Polly's home. Nina talks about being followed. And then when they get home, her mother's there with an envelope that is addressed to Polly, but that she opened. And it has another envelope inside that's also opened, because this came from Mr. Lynn, and her grandmother didn't trust it and opened it first to make sure that everything was like copacetic before sending it on. And when she asks, why did you open it? Her mother says, it was from Granny, she said in a stony voice. I thought it could have been something to do with your father. 2 tears oozed from her eyes. She shook them away so angrily that some salty water splashed on Polly's mouth. Stop standing staring at me, can't you? Go upstairs and play. I love the symbolism of, like, she's crying and in an effort to, like, stop herself, splashes it onto her daughter. Like, it's very obvious, but also really well done. Because, hi, yes, I'm going to try and deny my emotions, and in doing so, foist them onto everybody else in the household. Seems true. So Nina is setting out a doll's tea party and is very irritated because the letter from Mr. Lynn is really long and Polly is not a fast reader. So it takes a long time for her to get through. And the whole thing is a continuation of the little story that they started telling each other while they were in the garden at the funeral, which is that he, like, is an ironmonger, and when I hear ironmonger, I'm thinking like a blacksmith, but what they mean is just like he owns a hardware store. And that she's going to be like his second in command in training, but disguised as a boy, and he doesn't know. And that they are going to fight a giant in a grocery store was like the story that they chatted about. And this long letter that he writes to her is that whole story written out, and in a very charming way. And he has a sister, Edna, who doesn't like him to spend money on useless things like books. So he has to, he reads on anyway, and later on, Polly's like, no, she really hates it. Like, you have to hide the books that you're reading in other books about nails and stuff. And finally, there's like a crash. All of these people come running away from the grocery store, and he, grabbing an axe because he thinks it's robbers, goes into the grocery and realizes that it's a giant. And it's not like this isn't set in a world where giants are like a constant problem. When he sees the giant, he's like, giants don't exist. This is a trick of the light. Something else is happening. And finally, a little boy comes up to him and is like, no, this is really a giant and you need to deal with this. And they team up a little bit and wind up taking the giant down. And by taking it down, I mean that it is knocked out and he can't bear to kill the giant because he can't even bear to kill a fly. So how could he just like hack this giant's head off? That's super unfair. And he frames it as if, well, he's been knocked out and it would just be super dishonorable to kill him like this. Come on. And I love that he can tell in the story, the little boy is not satisfied with this. And sure enough, neither is Polly. She's like, yeah, you should have killed this giant. What the fuck? And they wind up trying to question the giant, the police. So they splash him in the face with a fire hose to wake him up. And he wakes up very angry, tosses a few police cars around, and then runs away. And they never see him again. So I really enjoyed this whole little story. And the way that things are described, he, is tossing around, like, because it's set in a modern setting like a grocery store. So he's throwing deep freezes around and frozen chickens are going flying everywhere. And they are slipping and sliding in puddles of dish detergent that are like on the floor, or he slips in yogurt and lands in butter. Just all of these little details that I think are really fun and clever and just add so much to the whole like atmosphere of it. And so she finishes the story and writes back to him a little thing. And this is when Nina finally is like, are you finished? Because one of the people that's following me is right outside. And I love this. She's like, why do you think they're following me? And Polly's like, why don't we go and ask? And they just go outside and fucking face off with this guy, which is like great. This is something I had forgotten about the other Diana Wynne Jones story that I really liked, but that people deal with things in a much more head-on fashion than they do in a lot of books, where it's always like treated like, oh, well, we can't fit. She's very direct. And I appreciate it because it's so unexpected in terms of like the narrative and how these kinds of things are usually handled. And it also really says a lot about the character if they do something that's like unexpected. By the time they reached him, he was flattened against the wall beneath the bush. He stared at them, and they stared at him. He was a good foot taller than they were. If it had not been for Mr. Lynn's letters, Polly thought she might have run away. "What are you spying on Nina for?" she said. Seb's face turned from one to the other. "Which of you is Nina?" "Me," said Nina in a scared, throaty way. "Then I'm not," said Seb. "It's you with the fair hair I'm supposed to watch. Now get lost, both of you." "Why?" Polly said, and Nina was indignant enough to add, "And we're not going till you tell us." So then he says, "You took something when you came to our house, didn't you?" "It was given me," said Polly. "So what? You took it," said Seb. "I am not a thief," Polly said angrily. "I didn't even break and enter. The door was open and I went in." "Shut up," said Seb. "Listen, you didn't eat and you didn't drink and you worked the nowhere vases round first. Don't deny it. I saw you working them, and I haven't told my father that yet. You owe me for that." "I don't understand a word of this," Nina said, "and it was me you were following, not Polly." "You shut up too," Seb said, jerking his chin at Nina. "You only come into this because the two of you act like Siamese twins, trotting to her house, trotting to your house, trotting to school together. I didn't know even little girls could be that boring." "We're not boring," said Polly. "Yes, you are. Boring as hell," Seb retorted disagreeably. "Hell's not boring," Nina said smartly. She hated not being the center of attention. "There's devils with forks and flames and thousands of sinners. You won't have a dull moment when you go there." I love this whole conversation. Can I just tell you, I love Polly being very demanding about getting some goddamn answers. I love Seb being super irritated that not only did they notice him, but that they're talking to him and that they won't leave him alone. I love Nina being really pedantic about whether hell is boring. This whole way that this goes, it tickled me deeply. I loved it. So Polly was puzzled and scared, but she said defiantly, "Laurel's not having it back. It's mine." "Laurel doesn't know," said Seb. "Luckily for you. Have you seen her talk to a certain person from the house since the funeral?" Yes, she said, "I'm talking to you now." And she prayed that Nina had not chanced to notice who the letter was from, or if she had, that Nina would have the sense not to say. So then finally, "All right, you haven't, and I should know, standing outside in all weathers, watching." "Don't you have to go to school at all?" Nina interrupted. Seb sighed. "Yes, I do, you boring little girl, but it's still half-term. Shut up, I'm talking to her." "Now, see, this is a warning. Don't have anything to do with a certain person, understand? Come on, promise. You owe me to promise." And she never does do that, but he still says later, "Don't forget to do what you promised," which she never actually did. So, But then he says, "If you break your promise, it won't be me who sees you. My father's bad enough, but if Laurel gets to know, I wouldn't be you for £1,000,000,000. Polly believed him. She shivered as hard as Nina. "I won't forget," she said. "And good riddance," Seb said. Polly watched him swing around and walk away. She watched him turn the corner by the pillar box. He was gone. Remembering, she thought, is not the same as promising. Good. I've won. So, that's that. So then this is when she goes back to the house, and her mom is kind of a jerk to her. She writes the return letter to Mr. Lynn and tells him that he doesn't need a sword because he has an axe, but he does need a horse because St. George had a horse for killing dragons. And there's a lot of like little details in here about like her misspellings and stuff like this that are really cute. And finally ends with Mr. Piper had a nephew, Edna is his mum, called Leslie. He is a horrid boy and gets scornful every time Mr. Piper is nice to him. Leslie is ashamed of Mr. Piper. He thinks he is mad. He did not see the giant. So I like this because she included this as like an afterthought, as if it's just an addition to the story, but it's clearly based on Seb, which I think Mr. Lynn's going to realize. Like, there seems to be something here that's more than just a little story that they're telling each other, except that I can't tell what it is because I'm only in chapter 3. She put the letter into an envelope and addressed it carefully. She went downstairs with it, intending to ask Mum for a stamp from her handbag. But since Ivy was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read a magazine and showing no sign even of thinking of getting supper, Polly helped herself to a stamp and stuck it on. She went back to the kitchen. So, yeah, this just again, this moment of being like, I'm going to ask my mom for help. Nope, you know what? I can tell just from her face, I don't need to ask her for anything right now. I'm going to deal with this myself. Polly smuggled the letter into the pillar box on the corner, looking around everywhere as she did it, as if it was the guiltiest thing she'd ever done. She had no doubt she was breaking the promise Seb thought she had made. Then she went on her way to the Chinese takeaway, thinking she was probably quite heroic. And that's the end of chapter 3, and that's where I stopped. So, yeah, thank you very much, Patricia, for commissioning this. I'm hoping that somebody will be able to pick up the next 50 pages because I'm dying of curiosity. I can't imagine what this means. It's such an unusual... I think what it is like, there's a lot of magic stuff that like, something happened and I'm very clearly in another place. Or I got involved in another world that's like part of our world, but not really. But there's a distinct line between what's what. Or, but this is something that she stumbled into it and she doesn't even seem aware of it. And that's a totally other situation that I find really amusing and fun. It's almost like you went to dinner at the Addams Family house. And you didn't realize, these people aren't really normal people, are they? And there's a bunch of stuff that, doesn't make sense. But they seem like human beings. And in their way, they're very pleasant or just seem like normal, but they're not. There's just something about this that it feels so much more surreal because of the fact that it's grounded in the world that she really lives in. And because of the fact that Mr. Lynn met her grandmother and met Nina. So, this isn't somebody that she imagined. This isn't a whole, fantasy world situation. This guy is a real person who has interacted with people that she knows and they know who he is. And that Nina saw Seb and Seb's father following her before Polly noticed. That's another thing, in these sorts of stories, a lot of times, the person who is aware that something kind of weird has been going on is the one who's hyper aware of everything around them and keeping an eye out and trying to hide it from their friends because it's strange and they don't know how to explain it. And in this, Polly is fucking so oblivious that it's Nina who has to be like, so somebody's been following me, which I love the fact that Polly's just not on top of this at all. I don't know. This is tickling me. I love it. It feels so imaginative. So anyway, I'm about to go commission the next 50 pages. Oh, yay! Hooray! Thank you, Patricia. I'm so excited. I'm so glad that you guys all have such good taste. I haven't yet hit a book for the commissions that I haven't liked. All of them, I'm like, ooh, I want to keep reading. So Abby says, oh, goody, I so wish I could afford to commission stuff. Don't worry, Abby, eventually, if you ever feel like it, maybe for your birthday, because that's why Patricia did it initially. But yeah, there's a lot coming up. So if you're not able to actually purchase a commission, there's still going to be plenty of stuff for you to attend and, enjoy. So, or hopefully enjoy. Abby says, I was just thinking my birthday's coming up. See? It's meant to be. I should make a gift card thing on my website. So you can buy a commission on behalf of somebody else, but I have no idea how I would get that to work. Anyway, so yeah, is there anything that you guys want to mention? I often say, are there any questions you want to ask? But I don't feel like there's much you can say right now that isn't spoilery because we're just clearly in the very beginnings of this story. So, I don't really even have any predictions here. The the one prediction that I have is that Mr. Lin is going to recognize what she wrote as not being just a story, as being like a reference to Seb actually being at her house. So I can't think beyond that because I want Mr. Lin to like show up again, but also if her house is being watched, that's a bad idea. And I feel like he would know showing up is a bad idea. So he'd have to find a way to contact her that they wouldn't notice. And I feel like another letter is the only way. And I don't know what that, like a letter doesn't feel like enough, right? Because you want an in-person interaction that means something. And did Mr. Lin know what Fire and Hemlock was when he gave it to her? Because Seb is acting like that particular painting is so important that I can't imagine Mr. Lin didn't know. And that's, I think, mostly what I'm having trouble deciding here is how charmingly befuddled is Mr. Lin really? How unaware is he really? Because he comes across as somebody who's just like kind of being bullied by all these other people at this party. But he was married to Laurel. Like, he was clearly a part of this somehow in a serious way. And now he's not. And what did he do? Like, the divorce feels like she decided that, but I have no evidence for that. And nobody seems to like him. So whatever it was that happened, I feel like that's why they are bitter towards him. I'm just dying to find out more about him in particular and what he has to do with everything. And what the hell the nowhere jars are. Yeah, all right. Well, guys, I think that's about it. So like I said, later today, I have So You Want to Be a Wizard, and that's going to be in an hour. It's at 1 p.m. Central Time live. And then tomorrow, I have the Jessica Jones. I keep wanting to say Jessica Jones. The Veronica Mars episode at 4 p.m. Central Time. Wednesday at 9:30 a.m., I have the next 50 pages of Parable of the Sower. And on Friday, super busy back-to-back day, 2 p.m., I have the next 50, or the first 50 pages of Six of Crows. Then I have the next 50 pages of Sunshine. And then I talk about the Pan's Labyrinth movie, which I have not seen. I'm going to watch that Thursday night. So there's a lot happening. And I'm really excited. I'm super glad to see that Spoil Me has taken off the way that it has. And I'm hoping that like you guys are all enjoying this stuff too, and that you're getting introduced to some new books that you're interested in checking out for yourselves, and TV shows and movies, because Veronica Mars has been really fun so far. I've only done 2 episodes, but number 3 is tomorrow, so that'll be fun. So yeah, guys, I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you all for coming. Again, thank you to Patricia for commissioning this episode and for commissioning the next one. And to Abby and Melanie for coming. I don't think that there was anybody else. I think it was just you 3, right? And and Devin Matthews is here. Hi, Devin. And I really hope to see you guys tomorrow or later this week with some of the other crowdcasts. And with that, I will leave you. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.